Welcome to another YouTube video, and as you saw in that introduction promo video, myself, Marcellus Williams, Sean Noriega, and Matt Cronin have a new venture we started that I've been teasing a little bit in the last couple of videos. So Powerlifting Now has been our subscription education service, and Strength Now is going to be our programs that are going to be available to purchase starting on February 23rd. Our goal with Strength Now is to bring the training methodologies that we use with our athletes at a very affordable cost to make this accessible to anyone. And where this differs from other program templates or even my free program that many of you may have used is all the additional features and resources that we include to help make this as close of a service to getting actual coaching as possible, but at a significantly less rate. For the same time period of 10 to 15 weeks that most of these programs run, that might cost an upwards of $600 to $800 if you're working with one of us specifically. But with this type of program, you can do that for $50 and still get a lot of resources, including one free month of Powerlifting Now, a full exercise library, full tutorial videos, a private Discord where you can be able to ask questions, everything that hopefully you need to set PRs, get stronger, and build muscle. With that said, I don't want to waste too much of your time and I want to get into the actual videos. So if you want some more detailed information on Strength Now, I'm going to include a link below to a 6-minute video that can give you a full breakdown of all the features it includes, as well as a link to our Instagram account where you can continue to get further updates. Getting into the topic of this video though, what we're going to be discussing is BFR training for powerlifters and when, why, and how to use it. And blood flow restriction training, or BFR training, it's nothing new, but due to a decrease in its popularity, at least in the application of powerlifting, I think there's a lot of people who are watching this video that may have never even heard of it or tried it, and those who have used it or tried it maybe haven't done it in a while. And even for myself, for the last 7-8 years, I've continuously programmed blood flow restriction training, but due to some situations over the last 7 to 8 months that have come up when I'm trying to solve problems for my athletes, as well as some continuing education I've been doing, I realized it was something that I probably have gotten too far away from. And while it's not a magical fix or a magical tool by any means, there's a lot of application for blood flow restriction training in powerlifting that I felt I was missing out on. And as I've increased the times I have programmed it recently, I've seen some really good benefit. And while BFR training can be great, it's not necessarily a one-for-one direct replacement for conventional accessory work. And as will be discussed in this video, there is a time and place where I think this can be of great utility, especially for powerlifters, but you do need to be careful. Don't watch this video and be like, oh, I just want to do BFR and start taking out some accessory work that's really beneficial in your program and replacing it, because that could have some downsides to it. Even though it's not a one-for-one replacement though, I do think it is underutilized in large part due to a lack of knowledge of what it is, what it can help with, and how to be able to program it. So what I want to do in this video is basically be able to give that information so that if you find times where this could be a good training tool, you know how to program it and what it hopefully can be able to benefit within your program. So in this video, we're going to cover a multitude of points, but first we're going to start off with what is blood flow restriction training, why it kind of went out of style after about 2018 or 2019 within powerlifting, why BFR training makes sense for powerlifters specifically, how to program BFR training and what exercise it works best with, how to actually do BFR training, and then lastly, where and why to add this into your program. First off, what is BFR training? I'm not going to go into a full deep dive on this. I'm sure there's going to be other videos that are much more expansive and really breaking down like the physiological impacts on what is occurring when you're doing blood flow restriction training. And to get that information, just simply search BFR training or blood flow restriction training on Google and you can be able to get that information. In short, blood flow restriction training is using tourniquets to occlude the venous blood flow, or the blood flowing out of the muscle and back to the heart, while still trying to allow arterial blood flow, or blood flowing from the heart into the muscle. And what this then does is pools blood and metabolites into a specific muscle while still recruiting high threshold motor units at very light loads. And I'm not going to do a deep dive into the research backing, but there's actually a lot of validity and research that shows that we can get similar hypertrophy benefits using blood flow restriction training. And someone I'm going to talk about here in a bit, Jeremy Lineker, has done extensive research on blood flow restriction training. And so if you'd like to see some more research on BFR, he would be my go-to. And what occluding the muscle does is allows you to be able to use significantly less loads, usually around 30 to 50% of what you'd normally use, while still getting fairly similar hypertrophy benefits, albeit a bit less specific, since this is leaning heavily into the sarcoplasmic style hypertrophy versus the myofibril. And while the application we'll discuss is in large part about powerlifting and bodybuilding too, since that's really what we're doing with a lot of the accessory stuff when we're targeting hypertrophy, this kind of got most of its traction initially, I believe, in the US from actually the physical therapy realm, and is still heavily used in the physical therapy side to this day, in large part because we can be able to train this musculature at very, very light loads while still getting similar benefits with 1, hypertrophy, 2, with the blood pooling and what they can possibly do for recovery benefits, and then 3, recruiting those motor units. And while this video is really kind of talking about powerlifting, rehab is an important part of powerlifting. And so when we get to later in the video, I'm going to discuss how one of the most beneficial times we can be able to use blood flow restriction training is during periods of rehab. Next up, why did BFR training kind of go out of style, at least from what I've seen? If we go back to 2014, 2016, that's when it really kind of gained some traction, specifically in the bodybuilding realm. There's a specific professor who kind of specializes in the bodybuilding side of things named Jeremy Lineker, and he did a heavy research focus into blood flow restriction training. And I already mentioned there's a lot of valid research showing the benefits of BFR, and a lot of that came from Jeremy Lineker. And then from Jeremy, we saw influential bodybuilders cross over powerlifters such as Lane Norton and Alberto Nunez really adopting BFR training, bringing it into powerlifting, and we saw a little bit of a surge there. But then after that, it kind of fizzled. We saw a little bit, at least myself, I saw a little bit kind of happening in 2018. We had Sean Noriega and Chance Mitchell in 2020 at this Elevate Barbells little COVID gym event, do this BFR belt squat stunt. But after that, I honestly really haven't seen too much of it outside of little bits and pieces here and there. And I think it fell out of popularity for 4 main reasons. And these are even reasons why I maybe didn't even program it as often, even though that it was something that I have used. And the first and foremost reason was equipment availability. Until recently, it was super rare for powerlifting gyms to have any types of machines, especially like a leg extension or a hamstring curl. Maybe we've got a cable machine for some tricep press downs or something. But as we'll discuss later in the video, BFR typically does best with stable machine-based isolation movements, and that was very rare to have in most gyms until recently. And so therefore, it makes sense why it was just not heavily programmed, because there wasn't the equipment availability to do so. Next was the availability of the tourniquets that I'll show. Either 1, could you even find them? And then 2, especially the lower body ones, could you find them at any type of reasonable cost? Where, as I'll show you in a little bit, you can get them now, both lower body and upper body tourniquets combined for under $20 shipped to your house, where that was not the case if we backtrack 5, 6, 7 years ago. The next reason I think it fell out of style was really programming methodology. When we're looking at 2014 to 2016, 1, we had a big crossover of bodybuilding to powerlifting, which brought BFR training with it, as well as we were heavy into the DUP, high specificity, high volume, and really just high mechanical stress. And so, as we'll discuss, one of the biggest benefits of BFR training is reducing mechanical stress. So it made a lot of sense that we're doing these really, really high volume, high specificity workouts, and we have very little room to allocate accessory work. BFR fit really well there. But then as we shifted, we moved more towards submaximal DUP style training, more heavy intensity accessory work, more equipment availability to do that accessory work. The need was a little bit less. Like I said, this is not a direct 1-for-1 replacement for accessory work. So when we can be able to do conventional accessory work, awesome. That's probably the best bang for our buck. But per usual, sometimes we have a pendulum swift too far into one side. So we had this heavy shift to submax DUP and heavy shift into accessory work, and probably a little bit too far away. And we're kind of in a period where we're kind of shifting back. And as we shift back, I think we have even more validity and application, and the reasons that I'll get to of where BFR training can fit into our programs. And then the last reason it fell out of style is, frankly, BFR training kind of is tough. It gives you the most insane pump you probably will ever have. It will make you feel like you just did 20 sets of arms or 20 sets of legs. And so with that, there's an adherence level. If someone doesn't want to fight through that pain, and they don't have the buy-in for it, it's a bit tough to program. And the fact is, when something is popular, it's easier to get people to buy in. When something is not popular, it's a bit harder to get someone to buy in. And so when BFR is kind of fallen out of favor and fallen out of style, it's just something that myself, probably a lot of other people may have kind of shied away from for the fact that it was a little bit harder to create the buy-in along with the other 3 points kind of stacking up to create this issue where it just wasn't a heavily used training tool. Moving on to the next point, why does BFR training make sense for powerlifters specifically? As I already mentioned, blood flow restriction training allows you to use very light loads, like 34 to 40, maybe 50% of the loads that you would typically use on these isolation-based accessory movements. And in my opinion, we're a sport where we're constantly battering ourselves with mechanical stress from squat, bench, and deadlift, heavy compound accessory movements like weighted dips and belt squats, specifically mechanical stress to the joints and to our ligaments. BFR has a lot of utility since the benefit of it is using such light loads that have very low mechanical stress. And so we can be able to offset all this mechanical stress we get from our main work by then supplementing with blood flow restriction training to get similar hypertrophy benefits with very low mechanical stress. As well as, even though you get this crazy pump, and if you've ever done BFR training, you feel like after your workout, you just had one of the craziest workouts of your life, and your legs might be cramping, your arms are super swole, you recover really quickly from it. For the fact that since it's using such low loads, it has a pretty low fatigue cost, as well as, like I said, it has pretty much no mechanical stress cost. If you're kind of looking at like exertion load or Mike T stress index, it is kind of fully on the peripheral side. There's very little mechanical or central stress. It is fully peripheral, and just from my experience and my athletes' experience, very easy to recover from because of the light loads that are being used. Next up, let's talk about how and why to program blood flow restriction training and what exercises it works best with. First and foremost, blood flow restriction training needs to be done with a muscle you can occlude. So that means usually biceps, triceps, because as you're gonna see in a bit, we're gonna occlude at the upper arm, or for the lower body, we can do our quads, hamstrings, and calves, because we can occlude either at the top of the leg or just at the top of the calf, albeit a lot of powerlifters don't even do calf work in the first place, but if you do, BFR can be an option for that. Next, it tends to work best with stable movements. Doing a Bulgarian split squat or a really like advanced movement that requires more stability probably isn't the best application of it. And I tend to bias more towards isolation-based movements that are very stable. So I'm gonna get to what that kind of means in a bit, but in large part, that's gonna mean machines. We can just focus on the individual musculature at hand, isolate it, occlude it with blood flow restriction training, and not have to worry about other factors of technique and stability and balance and the complexity of the movement. You can, in a sense, do BFR training with more compound movements, let's say lower body with like a belt squat or a leg press, but at least in my opinion, and how I like to program it, I bias more towards isolation movements than the belt squat versus leg press. And the reasons being is, one, as I mentioned, this is not a direct one-for-one replacement. It's very much biasing towards a different type of stimulus than going to be the conventional accessory work. It's very much on like very light loads, high sarcoplasmic hypertrophy versus doing sets of 6 to 10 on a belt squat while we're getting the hypertrophy benefits. There's a lot more mechanical stress and myofibrillar hypertrophy, which is a bit more specific and has direct transference in the immediate short term, even long term, to the competition lifts. Second, oftentimes when I'm programming blood flow restriction training, I'm really trying to isolate an individual muscle. And when you do a compound movement, you're just gonna end up training everything. If you do a lower body belt squat, you're doing hamstrings, you're doing quads, you're not really isolating one of the two and directly deciding which one is getting an increased kind of stimulus and volume. You're having to do the whole thing. So again, another reason why I tend to bias more towards isolation movements for the most part when it comes to blood flow restriction training. The only time that changes, and I'll discuss that further later in this video, is during times of rehab, where it can be really beneficial during those compound accessory movements to blood flow restrict, in large part because of how we're able to reduce the loading by a significant degree. So because of these factors and what I mentioned, if we're looking for isolated, stable, and likely machine-based movements, my go-to exercises that I typically program blood flow restriction training for is for quads, is going to be leg extensions. For hamstrings, I really like seated hamstring curls. For biceps, any type of bicep machine, dumbbells work as well, because even though they aren't in a sense as stable as a machine, they're still very low complexity and easy to do. Or even using something like an easy bar curl is very useful for BFR training. And for triceps, usually something like a tricep machine or some type of like tricep press down, I think are usually really easy and really beneficial when doing blood flow restriction training with. So that we understand now what movements likely work best for blood flow restriction training, how do we program it? First, make sure it's the last thing you do in your workout. It's hard to explain unless you've done blood flow restriction training, but as I mentioned, you are going to get a crazy pump. After you get that pump, you're pretty much going to be useless. Not from a fatigue standpoint, but for the fact that your arms or your legs are going to be so pumped that the endurance and ability to handle additional volume is going to be down. And then two, sometimes literally you're kind of just stuck. Like if you felt that before when you're pumped, like you literally kind of lose range of motion because your arms are so pumped up. Do it at the end of your workout. It's almost always the last thing I have people do, which works out well, considering usually isolation-based work is usually placed at the end of the workout anyways. For the actual programming, it's pretty simple. It's going to be 4 sets of 12 to 15 or 4 sets of 10 to 12 with 30 seconds rest between each set. And when I get to showing actually how to do it, that will make a bit more sense. Now, if you research or look into more on blood flow restriction training, you'll see a very common protocol is 4 sets and it follows a 30, 15, 15, 15 rep method. I've tried it. I'm not a big fan of it, which is why I tend to bias to 12 to 15 or 10 to 12. The reason being is one, to get 30 reps, you usually have to go so light to be able to get that, that it actually kind of makes it hard to progress the movement over time. Now, since we're using such light loads, you're not going to add a ton of weight to this movement, but I find that 12 to 15 or 10 to 12 allows a little bit more ability and runway to add loading over time. And then two, that 30 reps sometimes just spins you, and it's hard to even get to that second, third, and fourth set and get any quality there. So because of that, as I get to kind of the demonstration of how to do it, I've always kind of biased and found more utility in the 12 to 15 range or the 10 to 12 range for those 4 sets with 30 seconds rest in between. Now that hopefully you have a better understanding of what is BFR training, even looking at why it might have went out of style and why I think it has a little bit more utility now, looking at how we can be able to program it and what exercise it works for, let's look at how to perform it. So first and foremost, you need tourniquets. And so I will provide a link to both of these down below, but we have upper body tourniquets and lower body, and it's very big that you distinguish between the two. You can't really use the upper body ones for the lower body because they won't occlude enough, and we can't really use the lower body ones for the upper body because they're almost too thick. So we need both of them, but as you'll see, they're like $7, $8 for a pair of them, so you can get them shipped to you from Amazon for $20 total. Funny enough, these are the ones that used to not be readily available. I used to use actually like leg wraps, like really, really flexible leg wraps. These are available now mainly because people use them for glute BFR, which I could rant about, but that's not really a thing because you can't occlude your glutes because it's above the occlusion point. But these are the tourniquets that you will need. So for placement, I'm just going to show one of each, but obviously you're going to do both arms. And what you're going to be doing is right before you perform the set, you're going to place both of these in place for arms or lower body, and then be able to tighten them down. So what it's going to look like for upper body is we're going to be having these at the top. Usually I'll just kind of like slightly tighten them to have them in place. It's not fully tightened there. I'll get both of them on. And when I'm ready to go, I'm going to fully tighten it. These in particular really can't get too tight. You want about what I consider about 70 to 80% tightness, meaning that if I was to leave this on, my arm's not going to turn blue and I'm not going to lose feelings in my fingers in 30 seconds. Now, if I leave this on for 5, maybe 10 minutes, I might get there, but not immediately. Like this feels comfortable. It's not painful, but it's definitely tight. Like I definitely notice if I hold it here, my veins are going to start popping out a bit more and it is occluding blood flow in some way. And so for both of these that I have linked, pretty much that's full tightness. I can't pull it any further. So that's what the upper body one looks like. For the lower body, very similar thing. That will be placed at the very top of the thigh. From there, you're going to tighten it, and usually with this one, I'll tighten it once, and then I'll bring it back again, tighten it a little bit more. So this one goes right at the top of the thigh. For the arm, it goes right above the tricep, right below the shoulder joint. So from there, we can perform a set. So I'm not going to tighten these fully, but I'm going to have them on just so it can make sense as I'm kind of discussing this. We will have these on, and we will then perform our 4 sets of 12 to 15 with 30 seconds rest in between. I'm actually gonna have some videos pop up so you can kind of see me demonstrating this, of one me doing tricep extensions, blood flow restricted, and one of me doing leg extensions. You'll see it's kind of fast forwarded, so it's not going on forever, with the final set being normal speed so you can kind of see it. So what this should be like, you're going to use 30 to maybe 50% load. I'd always probably start on the lighter end of things because you can always increase in further weeks. And I usually find it takes someone maybe like 2 or 3 weeks to kind of get the hang of it and kind of knowing the right load to use. But this is what it should feel like. The first set, you're gonna have these on. They're gonna be fully tightened and your muscle will be occluded. And you're going to do, in the 12 to 15 rep range, likely 15 reps, and probably could have easily done 30. Like I said, we're only using like 30 to maybe 50% of the load. So that first set should feel super, super, super easy. 15 reps, probably could have done 30. Now you're gonna rest 30 seconds. Getting into the second set, you're gonna do another 15 reps. This time, it's still pretty easy, but maybe you had like 5 reps left in the tank. I probably could have done like 20 reps. Starting to get a little bit of a pump. Rest another 30 seconds. Now perform the third set. Again, these tourniquets are on the entire time. You're not taking them off. The third set, you're gonna shoot for 15 reps again, but it's gonna be to failure. This is where you're gonna be like, oh, okay, this is getting a little bit tough. Like I'm getting a pretty big pump. I was able to get 15, maybe I only got 14, but that was pretty tough. Rest another 30 seconds, and then the fourth set you're gonna do, and you're probably gonna barely get 12 reps, and it's gonna be to complete failure, and maybe you gotta do a couple cheat reps, and at this point, your arms and your legs are gonna feel like they're gonna blow up. So first set is super, super easy, probably 15 reps left in the tank. Second set, kind of easy, 5 reps left in the tank. Third set, hard, basically to failure. And then the fourth set, very, very hard, and maybe can't even get the prescribed number of reps, and it's gonna start decreasing a little bit. And some quick things to know if you went too light or too heavy. If you went too light, when you get to that third set, you're gonna notice that you really weren't at failure and it wasn't that hard. If that's the case, just increase the weight slightly and repeat a third set again. And what it should feel like is, again, that it should feel like that third set is to failure. If you went too heavy, you're probably gonna feel like the second set is getting to failure. And at that point, that third set is gonna be so tough that you can barely even do it. So, like I said, takes a couple weeks to kind of get the hang of it, but first set, super easy, second set, easy, third set, hard, fourth set, super hard. And then once you're done with that fourth set, simple enough, you just click the little button on the arm tourniquets, releases them, and then you take them off. On the legs, you just unrelease the lever and loosen them up. So you're gonna leave these on for the entirety of those 4 sets, and as soon as you're done with that 4th set, you can take them off. Now that we know how to program it, what exercises BFR tends to work best with, and then even how to perform it, lastly, let's look at the reasons why we might program blood flow restriction training. Because as I said, this is not a direct one-for-one replacement. If that's what you're doing, you're likely gonna have some downside effects of taking out the conventional accessory work. But if we properly place blood flow restriction training for the right reasons, we can get a lot of benefit from it. And I've got 4 main reasons that we're going to look at. The first main reason to add in some blood flow restriction training is when you'd like to add some additional volume or workload, but with lower mechanical stress. As mentioned, BFR uses really, really light loads that allows you to get similar hypertrophy benefits with very low mechanical stress and low fatigue costs. So it's an easy way to add more workload without having the same fatigue or stress factors that can be able to compound with other accessory options. So for example, maybe you're wanting to add some additional leg volume, but anytime you do, that person starts to get really beat up in their knees. They get really, really achy. So therefore, you can maybe add some blood flow restrictions training in with hamstrings or with hamstring curls or leg extensions to be able to get additional volume, but not adding to the achiness and mechanical stress that's already accumulating. For the upper body, a very, very common one is triceps. I know this for myself, even with my athletes, with the amount of benching we do, the amount of accessory pressing we do, and even low bar squatting, it puts a lot of stress on the elbow joint. For myself specifically, I always really struggle with having a lot of additional tricep accessory work in conjunction with all of the benching and squatting, but I was always able to be able to do more blood flow restriction work for our triceps. So that's a great way to be able to add it in, is if you're finding that someone's triceps or their elbow joint is getting a bit too beat up from the cumulative workload from all of the bench pressing, squatting, and already programmed accessory work, you can be able to add it in additional tricep work if you feel like you need it, but doing it blood flow restricted to be able to reduce that mechanical stress. The next time I would add in blood flow restriction training is if within your current program, you already feel like you have a bit too much mechanical stress. You're not even looking to add additional volume or workload. It's just that the current volume or workload you have, you know you need, but you're getting a lot of achy joints, achy elbows, achy knees. And what we can do instead is replace some of those isolation-based movements with blood flow restriction training to hopefully reduce the totality of the mechanical stress, maintain the volume and workload so we're still getting the adequate amount of work we need and the adequate amount of hypertrophy work, but shifting some of that stress from that like mechanical or central stress to the peripheral or muscular stress side of things. The third reason you might add in blood flow restriction training is to basically add an additional day of work, whether that's like a tertiary day or just an additional day of maybe where you're trying to increase someone's work capacity or kind of set up the runway for additionally or eventually adding an additional day of squatting or conventional accessory work. So a good example is maybe someone's squatting twice a week and you want to eventually work into squatting 3 times a week. So you can be able to add in blood flow restricted leg extensions on that Thursday to already start kind of getting them acclimated to that, increasing their work capacity for that third exposure, but at a very low mechanical stress cost and very low fatigue cost. And then lastly is during times of rehab. And I think this is where it is by far the most underutilized. And if you ignore everything else I said in this video, and you're like, Steve, this is dumb. I don't want to do blood flow restriction training and replace my conventional accessory work in a normal powerlifting program. You really need to consider it during times of rehab because it can be incredibly beneficial. There's a reason why it's still incredibly popular in the rehab setting because it works super well. When we are trying to rehab, very often one of our main limiting factors is absolute load, meaning that as a weight gets heavier, the pain increases. And so because of that, we're in this situation where we're so intensity restricted that it's hard to be able to get the same training effect and adaptations. That's where blood flow restriction training can be super beneficial. We can use 30 to 40% of our normal loading, which in the case and what I'm talking about, hopefully would therefore then be pain-free since the absolute load is so low, but we still get similar hypertrophy benefits. We get the metabolite buildups and the blood flow that very well can create the analgesic effect or even some type of healing effect. And then maybe even more so in this regard is the fact that we get recruitment of those high threshold motor units while using super light loads. And so we can be able to insert in and replace our conventional movements or even our competition movements if we can't perform those correctly with blood flow restriction training to get the adequate volume and workload to make sure that we're not atrophying and we're maintaining our workload for hypertrophy in the sense of the relative intensity where we can still work to somewhat higher RPEs, recruit certain motor units that aren't going to be recruited usually at lighter loads because we're able to occlude, as well as hopefully be able to do movements that are pretty specific or at least closer in specificity. As I mentioned prior, for blood flow restriction training, in most scenarios for powerlifting, I'm going to bias towards isolation movements. With the rehab setting though, that is where we have a great opportunity to do these more compounded movements, blood flow restricted, super light loads, get the benefits where we might not be able to do it otherwise considering the pain we might be experiencing. So let's say we're having some type of adductor issue, low back issue, maybe even knee issue. Using blood flow restriction on something like a leg press or a belt squat, even maybe like a heel elevated goblet squat, can be super beneficial for us to be able to use these really light loads and be able to still get the adequate amount of volume. Maybe we don't even have to train it the same way in the sense of what I've been talking about. We're taking some of these sets to failure. In the rehab sense, we may not take these sets to failure. We can still use these light loads, leave a little bit of room in the tank, not have to go truly to failure in the same way, but that occlusion still is going to allow us to have a higher relative intensity with these really light loads. So reiterating again, if there's anything you take away from this, is that even if you're not going to program it and within a normal program, it definitely is a highly valuable tool in a rehab setting when an athlete is experiencing pain and we want some type of option to be able to maintain workload, maintain some type of relative intensity, and then maintain some type of specificity that's likely going to help them return to sport faster than a lot of other conventional methods. That concludes the video on BFR training for powerlifters, when, why, and how to use it. So hopefully that gave you some good information, especially if you were not familiar with blood flow restriction training in the first place on what it is, why it fell out of style, and why I think there's better utility now and reasons why we should be using it, how to program it, and the exercises that it works best for, how to actually perform it, and then when it usually fits best within the program. As always, feel free to ask questions below if you have any questions, share, subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure to check out Strength Now for those new programs if you're interested, and otherwise, until next time, peace.